after lab tour because they're more complex structurally than the protists are. We're in domain eukarya. These are eukaryotic organisms, kingdom fungi. Eukaryotic, they have a nucleus. Remember, they got compartments for holding the DNA. And then our first major new definition here, hypha, is how the fungus grows. Right? So you're used to seeing mushrooms that are growing up above the ground. When you're looking at a mushroom, that's a fruiting body. That's only maybe 10% of the whole fungus. 90% of the fungus you don't see. You're just seeing 10% of it. The rest of the fungus that you don't see is under the surface. It's under the ground, or if it's a mushroom growing out of a piece of wood with a shelf fungi, it's under the surface of the bark. Okay, so what is under the surface are these. These are the hypha, strands of fungi that are the growth form that's spread out. They come in two types, septate and cenocytic. Septate is when there are walls between the cells, like you can see right here and right there. Cell walls between the cells of the hypha. Cenocytic, there are no cell walls. For those of you that have had general biology, what that means is that mitosis happens, nuclear division, but no cytokinesis. The nucleus divides, but the cytoplasm doesn't. Cytokinesis is division of the cytoplasm, so that doesn't happen in a cenocytic hypha. Most of the hypha that you'll be looking at today, you're not going to be able to tell if they're septate or cenocytic because they tend to grow all interwoven on top of each other. So it becomes tough. The only reason you can see it here is because whoever made the slide teased out hypha so that you could just see individual strands. Normally they're all overlapped. So hypha is the growth form of fungi. Septate has walls, cenocytic doesn't. And when they're all overlapped in that big clump, we have another term, mycelium. So hypha is one strand of fungus. Mycelium is when a bunch of them are together. Alright, so classification. This is kingdom fungi. There's so many fungi that they get broken into groups, just like we took those protists and broke them into groups. 4 groups of fungi based on their type of sexual reproduction. They all produce spores for sexual reproduction. It's just a matter of how the spore is made that determines whether they go into one group or another. So the first group here, Basidiomycetes. If you've taken general biology, you may have learned these as Basidiomycota. Depends on the book you read, what they call it. I wouldn't mark you wrong for either one. Your lab book calls them Basidiomycetes, though, which is why I put that in here, but the Basidiomycota is fine. In order for this group to reproduce sexually, they produce a fruiting body. Bless you. It's a little structure that grows out of the hypha called a basidium. And it's the basidium that produces the spores, and those spores are external, meaning they're on the outside of the basidium. And there's a picture of that on the next page, but those of you that are copying, I'll give you a second. Basidiomycota structures a basidium that makes the spore, and those spores are external. So here's the picture. This is the hypha going top to bottom right here. And this little tiny thing that looks like a tree, that whole structure is the basidium. And these are the spores that are on the outside of the basidium. Drawing of the same thing here, the hypha would be going left to right across the bottom of this one, and lots of basidium sticking up. And again, all of the spores are external. Sterigmata is just a little stem that attaches the spore to the basidium, but that's not a term that you need to know. And basidium is the term that you need to focus on there. External spores. Questions on that one? All right, second group of fungi, the Ascomycetes or Ascomycota. This group, the structure that makes the spore is called an ascus. Grows up out of the hypha the same way that the basidium would in Basidiomycetes. But the difference is the spores are internal, which you can clearly see in the drawing here. The hypha, again, would be going left to right, and all the spores are lined up in a chain inside of the ascus. And here's a picture of one under the microscope, where you can see lots of asci, plural of ascus there, and all the little dots inside are the spores lined up in chains. So Ascomycetes, the ascus makes the spores, and the spores are internal. Basidiomycetes, the basidium makes the spores, and they're external. And just to show you, not all fungi, of course, are microscopic. There are some that you can see with the naked eye. This is what members of Ascomycetes look like when they are big enough to be seen without a microscope. They tend to have sort of a cup shape. Questions on that group? Third group is just called lower fungi. If you have had biology 102, you might have learned these as the Zygomycota. Your lab book, though, just calls them lower fungi, so that's the term that you need to know, lower fungi. In this group, they produce spores, but they don't have an ascus or a basidium. They don't have any kind of fruiting body that makes them. And instead, what happens is the hypha of one fungus touches the hypha of another, and that's where sexual reproduction occurs. The spore is made as that conjunction between the two. Water mold and black bread mold are in this group, not the green mold that you'll sometimes see on breads. Black bread mold, that's in this group. Usually that green stuff is either Aspergillus or penicillin, which we'll get to in a second. So, produces a spore but doesn't have any particular structure to make it. Last group here, group number 4, the Deuteromycetes, we're not sure what they do. This is the I don't know category. So there's no sexual stage observed, meaning we haven't figured out how they reproduce sexually yet. Okay, so this is the catch-all group, the classification for convenience. We find a new fungus, and we don't know how it reproduces yet. We stick it into Deuteromycetes until we figure it out. So just to give you an example, the fungi that we found made penicillin, the name of the fungus is actually Penicillium, was in this group for decades, Deuteromycetes, before we figured out that they're actually a member of Ascomycetes. They produce an ascus. So this is where they go until we figure out what it is that they do. You okay with 4 groups? Bless you. Yeast, bless you. Most of the fungi are multicellular. So this is the only sort of category. It's not a group. It's just sort of a subgroup, I guess, would be the best way to say it. The only type of fungi that's single-celled are yeasts. Everything else is multicellular. And you've already looked at them. Back in lab 2, you looked at the Saccharomyces slide. You're going to look at the same slide again for this lab. Remember, these are the ones that were round cells, look like cocci, but remember, you can see them under the high dry, not on oil immersion. And of course, we use them to make bread and beer and wine and all that stuff. They're technically members of Ascomycetes. They will create an ascus to reproduce sexually. So what we're going to do now is the same thing we did last time. We're on the materials page of Lab 3, which I believe is around page 17. If you want to go over that. We're going to go through all of the slides that you need to look at today, so I'm getting some hints on how to identify them. And also, if there's any diseases they cause, that's typed out to the right, which of course is all potentially physical information for this Wednesday.
So we have a 3 and 4 quiz on Wednesday?
Wednesday is going to be Lab 4 from last time, and we're doing Labs 3 and 5 today. It's going to be a big quiz.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so that first item listed on your materials page, page 17, has 3 slides, or 3 organisms on the same slide, right? It's Aspergillus, Rhizopus, and Penicillin on the same slide. We don't have all 3 of them on the same slide, and we've got them all individually. So, next one down on your list is Aspergillus, member of Ascomycetes, so you can see the hyphen here pretty clearly. And then the asci on top looks like a big ball of spores there. Aspergillus generally doesn't cause any human infections. Skin and respiratory infections, that's usually in people who maybe aren't quite as healthy to start with. People that have allergies and asthma or are immunocompromised in some way, they're HIV positive or have an organ transplant, something like that, are going to be more susceptible to Aspergillus than somebody who isn't in one of those categories. The black mold in buildings that we're worried about after floods, like Katrina, kind of going in and rip out all the drywall out of everything, Aspergillus is usually that mold that's the problem. It looks, depending on which slide you get, sometimes Aspergillus and Rhizopus look similar to each other. Rhizopus is one of the next two slides that you've got in three down. You'll see that same sort of hypha and then what looks like a ball. Most of the time, with Aspergillus, the outer edges of that ball of spores are messy. And it's very irregular, not a perfect circle. Usually, not always, but usually Rhizopus, the outer edge of that ball is much smoother. And sometimes it's even two-toned. You get a different color on sort of an inner circle, and then a different color on the outer circle. Depends on the slide you get. Some of our slides for Rhizopus are pink, some are black. Color is not going to help you. Remember, you can be looking for the shades. Just make a note, you want to look at those two close together so you can tell them apart. Okay with Aspergillus. Okay. Penicillium. Notice the spelling of the fungus is different than the antibiotic, right? Penicillin is the antibiotic, penicillium is the fungus that it came from. This is one of the easier ones to identify because of this shape. You've got like a broomstick shape, right? Here's the handle, and here's the straw, and the end of the broom. Again, color's not going to help you. Some of our slides are green, some of them are pink, but you're looking for those broomstick shapes, and you're going to have to be on high drive before you see them. Also remember, fungi are all growing on top of each other, so you're going to see a big ball of pink or a big ball of green. Make sure you're going out to the edges of it in order to be able to see individuals. So piled on top of each other in the middle, you're not going to be able to see broomsticks. So make sure you're out at the edges of that clump where you're going to see these. Doesn't cause any human diseases, but our first antibiotic was found from the fungus. Here's the Rhizopus that we talked about. Probably not the best picture of it because it's not showing you that two-tone shape. But I put it in here because what you can see is you've got two hypha that are touched in a ball forming. See here, two hypha that are touched in a ball forming. That's sexual reproduction happening. So you can see that spore forming without a basidium or an asterisk. There's another one probably right here in the early stages where the two are touched and they will form a spore like that as well. It's a member of lower fungi. No ascus, no basidium, right? The two hypha just touch. So you produce a spore where they meet. They're hypha from two different fungi. This causes a lot of problems in plants. This is the black mold that you see on bread. Root rot in beets, head rot in sunflowers, such as being the middle where the seeds are, right in the middle of the sunflower. That would get rotted out by this fungus. And for humans, this generally isn't a problem unless you've got a big wound. Burn patients have a lot of trouble with Rhizopus. You had a deep wound, like a stabbing, that wasn't cleaned out very well. You might have trouble with Rhizopus. So it's an opportunistic pathogen. As long as you've got intact skin, Rhizopus can't cause an infection. But you have some sort of wound where you've lost integrity of the skin, Rhizopus can sometimes come in and cause an infection. In this day and age, it's usually burn patients that have the biggest problem with that because obviously they've lost the integrity of their skin and they've got large amounts of third-degree burns over their body. Questions on that one? Okay. Moving swiftly along, budding yeast. It's the same slide you looked at in Lab 2, except that Lab 2 called it Saccharomyces. So just looking at that same slide again, doesn't cause any human problems. This is the one for beer and bread and wine. Saprolegnia. This is a lower fungi. So again, no ascus, no basidium. You have two hypha that touch in order for the spore to form. This one, it's a water mold where the Rhizopus grows on bread usually. This grows on the surfaces of the water, some of that scummy stuff that you'll see on stagnant water. And it has this very characteristic structure, these round things that have balls inside. That's the female gamete, sort of analogous to our ovaries with eggs inside. Okay, so this is the female